This episode is brought to you by 10 Yetis Digital. We started using these guys at the beginning of the year and we've had great results. They're an online public relations agency that manage influencer marketing campaigns, social media campaigns, design. They do design, and they cover sort of multiple sectors, brands big and small. Highly recommended. That's 10yetis.co.uk. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast. Gareth here. What an interview we have for you. Luke Hakes, who's one of the partners at Octopus Ventures, one of the biggest VC funds in Europe. Top bloke, really interesting stuff. Did a PhD in computational genetics. Actually fell into venture capital in it's got a funny story. I would call it opportune circumstances for sure. He runs the healthcare and health tech portfolio for Octopus Ventures, and he's invested in hundreds of companies over the years. We break down his criteria for investment. We talk about the importance of building human capital value and just building value in general. We talk about upcoming macro shifts and the opportunity that's going to come from that. And we talk about opportunity mirage as well, which is an interesting concept, and many other things as well. It's a really good interview, lots and lots of value. I really enjoyed this one. It's Luke Hakes. So Luke Hakes, massive thank you for coming on the show. Really excited about talking to you. We did have this set up for the beginning of the lockdown period, but I think you were obviously you had a lot on your plate, shall we say, which is an understatement around that sort of initial time. So we can dive right into that and unpack that a bit as we go on. But first of all, can you just give us an intro to yourself, like a broad overview of your career journey from sort of education to where you are now?
Sure. So I'll start with where I am today and maybe go backwards if that works. So
yeah,
at the moment, I'm a partner at Octopus Ventures. For those that have never heard of Octopus, it's an early stage VC fund focusing in largely on tech companies across 3 verticals. So future of health, as we describe it, future of money and deep tech. So fintech, health tech, and everything else. Lots of AI and robotics in the deep tech bucket. And that's a fund that's investing, about 150 million a year, about 1.2 billion in assets under management. So been going 12 years. So we're a pretty new fund on the block, but one that's grown pretty quickly over the last period. And, been pretty interested and pretty fortunate to be investing over that period. Obviously from 2008 onwards has been an interesting post-recession recovery. And obviously we're about to start a new cycle. So maybe we can double click on what we think that means for the future. But I actually started my career as a scientist. So research scientist. I've done my degree in biochemistry, biotechnology, got roped into a master's in computational biology, and then ended up doing a PhD again by being roped in by my supervisor in computational genetics. So background largely in biology and big data. And, kind of was decent at that, but didn't really fancy spending the next 30 years being focused on yeast, which was my specialist subject of choice. Really important organism, useful for beer and bread.
I might be able to ask you a question on that at the end, Luke, because I've started brewing my own kombucha, which has been one of my things during this period. So maybe
I'd be happy to answer questions on yeast. It tended not to be a great conversation starter, especially at parties. So it was one of the reasons I moved away from that.
Yeah.
And I realized that, unlike a lot of the scientists I work with, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I could turn my science into a company or value that was, above and beyond kind of human endeavor. And realized that, there was 2 options for me. Either I became an entrepreneur, which struck me that I needed kind of money to do, or I went to do something like consulting where I get to learn business and get paid for it. And so, I moved from being a scientist, ultimately jumping into consultancy. I threw all the biology in the bin and ended up being a consultant who specialized in financial services, such as the consultancy market. Apparently, if you are semi-smart, they get you to try and solve very smart people's problems, even though you know nothing about their industry. And so I then spent the next couple of years working in financial services, helping investment banks solve their problems. I spent a bunch of years at Goldman Sachs, helping them start business units. And then in 2008, as the world fell apart and kind of work in financial services was going to dry up pretty quickly. And certainly anything that was new and interesting in financial services was being stopped as everything went into survival mode. You may see some similarities with the situation today. I called a headhunter and said, hey, look, I've been a scientist. I've learned some things about business. I've worked in financial services, and I happen to have understood asset management and worked in those divisions. And when I put all that together alongside a recession, feels like I should be doing venture capital. And the headhunter said to me, there are no jobs in venture capital, so, good luck. And I said, well, if there are any, then please do give me a call. And 2 days later, actually, he called me back and said, Luke, you're not going to believe this, but there's a brand new fund that's just been set up, and the individuals there are looking for somebody to join the business at a junior level, but somebody that understands science, that has, understands business a bit, and ideally has some experience in financial services. So I immediately thought of you. You're going to have to take a pay cut, but, hey, it's an opportunity to be in on the ground on a brand new endeavor. Sounds pretty interesting to me. And so I turned up to the interview, really got on with the guys. And as luck would have it, and not many people believe me when I say this, it just so happens that the deal that these guys were looking at the day that I turned up was a deal in the area of drug discovery. And the methodology that these guys were using was a systems biology methodology. I won't go into the details of it, but needless to say, there's probably 6 people on the planet that knew anything about it. And it just so happened to be the thing I'd done my PhD on. So
it must be written in the stars then.
At that point, I was a shoo-in because I kind of got given the job and was sent to go and diligence this company in week 1. So that's how I became a VC. Bit of luck.
If the venture capital gods were smiling down on someone, it was you on that
particular day.
That's incredible.
In actual fact, we did that deal almost, it'd be 11 years ago. This week, it's gone up. It's a listed company now. It's now gone up in the last week almost 18x in relation to the COVID crisis. So it's been a long time coming, but that asset might actually be delivering on the promise it always had.
Oh, sorry, which asset is this now?
One of our companies, which is now a listed company, it's called eTherapeutics. So it's on the AIM market, but it's been a kind of stealth stock for a long time, as it's been in the kind of development phase. Had a number of misstarts actually, but they seem to have some interesting data around some potential treatment with respect to the current health crisis. So seems to be some interest in the stock.
That was your route into venture capital. So talk us through the runway through to where you are now.
Yeah, so day one I turned up as an analyst, very small team, just 3 founders of the firm. They were slightly older gentlemen at the time. In fact, all of them have now retired or moved on. And I think the conceit was, as I joined, that, yes, I'd have to take a bit of a pay cut. And yes, I was starting at the bottom of the ladder. But as I stared at the people that had hired me, I realized that the opportunity was probably mine to take. If I could survive long enough, I would probably be able to inherit the business, at least, in part.
Yeah.
And so over the next 12 years, we built the business from, at the time when I joined, 15 million in assets under management, right up to where we are today, 1.2 billion, invested in over 100 companies. Been very fortunate to work with some incredible founders of some very well-known businesses in the UK, especially on the consumer space. And the success of those companies has enabled us to drive the returns, that has enabled us to raise more money and to continue to build that fund. So, I've kind of elevated myself from the bottom of the ladder to being one of the partners today, alongside 4 colleagues, and the team has changed from being 3 or 4 people now to 40 people in the UK, the US, in New York, and 1 or 2 people over in Asia, in Singapore and Shanghai. So, we've taken it from a 15 million local fund to a 1.2 billion kind of global endeavor.
Wow. And how have you seen venture capital change over the last 11 years then? What are the most notable differences between now and then?
The change in London specifically, the global change has been interesting. London specifically is irrecognizable. I think when we first started out, there were very few funds in the market. There were the large, well-known tier 1 funds, the Accels and Index, the funds that are still large and well-known in tier 1 today. And then there were a few, smaller players, some angel networks and some of that, and 1 or 2, funds that were actively investing, but really, not very much at all. There was pros and cons to that. The pros being that if you had money and could invest, you would get deal flow, which is really how we were able to start out at the beginning of that recession. There were very few people making investments. We happened to be one of them. But there was also very little in the way of ecosystem. So, there was no Silicon Roundabout, there was no startup ecosystem, there were no events, there was no peer support. And so the entrepreneurs that were out there at the time, were kind of out there in the wilderness and working very hard to understand things that are, or get the information that's pretty easily accessible today. So sourcing deals, finding deals, and building companies, I think, was much more challenging in those markets. There just wasn't the information, there wasn't the talent pool, there wasn't necessarily the experience, and certainly there were very few serial entrepreneurs that had done it before and were back in the ecosystem helping others do it again. And, all of that has changed over the years. We now have an incredible, thriving, vibrant startup ecosystem, huge number of funds, tens, if not hundreds of funds of different sizes. There's been a move from generalist funds, which certainly was the case when we invested, to specialist funds, and that has driven specialism within the generalists. So, when we started out, we were very much a generalist outfit investing across multiple sectors. We'll still consider deals across multiple sectors if we believe in the founding teams, but when we're doing proactive outreach, we're really focusing on, health and money and deep tech. And the reason we've had to do that is a response to the specialist funds in the market and the demand from the entrepreneurs that, funds are able to provide more than just capital. It's about the infrastructure you can provide. We double down on talent. We have a whole talent team that helps entrepreneurs recruit, retain, and develop talent. And we have, networks in each of the verticals that we focus on. So I think, aside from the market evolving, becoming much larger, it's also become much more sophisticated. There's much more in the way of expectations around investors from entrepreneurs, and there are just far more well-informed entrepreneurs, helping each other as well as triaging the funds and selecting the ones they want to work with rather than just the ones that have got capital.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for all the reasons you've just explained, there's been a big cultural shift in the last 20 years in the UK as well, hasn't there? You go back to the 90s and there was very few new businesses being started up. I interviewed one of the CTO or the CTA, actually, he is of Starling Bank, about 2 or 3 months ago, Jason Maud, and he was saying how that before them and Monzo, with an exception of Metro Bank, and there hadn't been a bank starting up in the UK for 150 years, which was astonishing, really, isn't it? There was just this massive gap. There was a lot of entrepreneurship in Victorian times, and then it kind of just went quiet for a very long time and picked back up in the last 20 years. Well, is that kind of, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think the catalyst was the financial crisis. Prior to that, certainly when I'd been in business schools and when I'd spent time, in the London ecosystem, most of the narrative was around, in the late 2000s was around, leverage finance, leverage buyouts. Everyone wanted to be an investment banker, and if not an investment banker, they wanted to be a consultant. Everyone was kind of chasing the financial services dream. In 2008, as all of that collapsed, all of a sudden it became quite risky to work for a large corporate. It certainly became not very appetizing to work in the financial services sector. Yeah. And so a lot of the folks where historically they would have said, my risk reward appetite is such that I want to work in a big company. They recognized that actually the risk of a big company was quite high, and that actually they could go and start a company which was, notionally, historically much higher risk, but in this case maybe similar, but the rewards were much greater. And then the ecosystem just shifted in London as financial services started to take more of a backseat, and the kind of startup ecosystem started to fill that gap. And that just led to an explosion of ideas and an explosion of appetite to try and disrupt the old model. And so, I'm not saying that 2008 was entirely responsible for that shift, but it was definitely a catalyst, both for the government and for individuals to drive change.
Yeah, and I think Silicon Valley had a big hand in this as well, making entrepreneurship, for want of a better word, cool. Yeah. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk talks about it a lot. Everyone's a CEO these days. You know what I mean? And I think what he means by that is that there's lots of people, there's lots of entrepreneurs. To use that term as well. So it's a good segue into something else then, Luke, because obviously you've got to have an almost, being a scientist, I'm sure you can pick these things apart really well. You've probably got a system and you've got a load of principles by which you base your decision on whether to invest or not. What do you look for in a startup who are looking for VC funding? What are the absolute musts for you to even consider it as a prospect?
Yeah, I think, given that we've talked about my journey as a VC, I think my journey on what to look for has probably evolved as well. I think back in the early days, as you would say, I'd spend a lot of time focusing on the proposition, technicalities of whether or not the thing worked. If it was a widget, was it novel? How was it unique? What was its special advantage over others in the market, whatever it might be. You realize pretty quickly that actually, they're kind of table stakes and must-haves. And then you start thinking about go-to-market and how do you actually get this thing sold and the commercial aspects of the widget. And then you realize actually that much of that can be quite table stakesy as well, because there are only so many routes to market. Not to say that actually you don't need to have something that's well thought through and well executed. But it comes down to that execution piece. And I know it's cliche, but it is the case that we invest in people and teams. And I do say today, if I had one superpower, if I could ask for a single superpower, my superpower would be to be able to assess whether or not the individual I'm speaking to is able to recruit, retain, and develop world-class people. Because if you could ascertain that, irrespective of what it is you're investing in, that person is likely to make a success of whatever it is you give them money to do, because they'll hire great people that just figure out solutions to problems that have value and will turn capital to more value. Even if it's not exactly the thing they set out to do, if they build the right team with the right capabilities and the right attitude, they will recover value or create value. So, it's that ability, and it's why we double down on the talent function in the fund, because in the absence of quality people, you never get quality companies.
No, absolutely. It's interesting what you say about having this scalable persona, or having this leader who can hire good people and almost instill their vision into others, because that's quite special, isn't it? Do you know what? I don't know if you watch Netflix. There's a documentary on there at the moment about the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, called The Last Dance. Did you watch it? Yeah,
I haven't seen it. It's a topic of discussion in the fund now. So
honestly, I'm not a basketball sort of fat person by any stretch. I like sports, obviously, but I used to have a Chicago Bulls baseball cap when I was a kid in the 90s, so that's why I immediately was drawn to it. But it was talking about Michael Jordan and being this genius and things, and the interesting part, which I thought was quite poignant, was they were talking about how he was clearly an amazing player from all the way through his school years and all this sort of thing. But something happened a couple of years into his career where he shifted from wanting to win matches on his own to wanting to elevate his teammates to win matches. And that's when he became truly great. He went from being the one-man team to being the great team. They were a great team because of him. And that was evident because he retired for 2 years. They didn't win a championship. They had a terrible record. He came back. They were brilliant again. So he was a scalable persona. Do you see what I mean? He was elevating everyone around them. So, it's an amazing, if you can find people with that trait, surely that's a good investment prospect for you then, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's I don't know if you've ever seen the kind of 4 stages of somebody's career where you go from being, a kind of individual contributor to an influencer of people outside your immediate sphere. So kind of stage 1 to stage 4. I think, you have to find those folks that are in that stage 3 and stage 4 where they start to get leverage from themselves to being able to drive a team to deliver results. So, yes, you need somebody who's a fantastic individual contributor. They have to have come up with a product potentially. They have to be able to demonstrate they can do what they need to do in the early stages. But to be successful, if they are to stay in post, then they need to be able to inspire others and get scale and leverage for themselves. Now, it may be actually that's not an attribute that everybody has. Some folks are amazing individual contributors and they can hire decent people up to a point, but at that point then, they reach a limit. And at that point, the attribute you need is self-awareness, because it's about being able to say, I've reached my limit, and then being able to find the person, find the Jordan, whoever it might be, who can then take the business and the team on to the next stage. And I think sort of going back to your point around Silicon Valley and about the maturity of the Valley versus the London ecosystem, and this is still true to this day, there's still a sense in the London ecosystem and the European ecosystem actually more broadly that if you're not the leader from start to finish, if you're not the guy or girl that founded the business and then took it to an exit or IPO, whatever it might be, then you failed. Whereas I think there's an acceptance in the Valley and in more mature markets where actually everyone accepts that you may be able to take a business from seed to Series A, but then you might need to pass that business on from somebody to take it from Series A to C, and then similarly somebody might take it on. And you have this notion of professional CEOs, and it just, for the investor, it just makes the transition in terms of leadership teams so much easier. The business grows so much more smoothly when people accept that actually they've reached their limit, and time is now time to put somebody else in there who can really help drive business, not only for the investors but for them as individuals, for their shareholding in the company.
Yeah.
And we're not yet at a point, I think, in Europe where some of the founding CEOs fully accept that and understand that that's an acceptable route. It's not a route of failure, it's a route of success. It's just you have to accept that at that point it's going to be somebody else that drives that success. Not that you won't benefit it, it's just that somebody else has capabilities that you don't.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. I think founding CEOs are brilliant up to a point, aren't they? But then to really take it to the next point level, do you find it? I'm sure you do find this, that it's difficult to get them to let go a lot of the time, though, because this is their baby, isn't it? It's this the famous Apple story with Jobs and things, and they had to bring in someone else, and he was just a nightmare when this guy started, and they ended up firing the founder as Jobs, didn't they? So I'm sure you've seen this before.
Yeah, and it's exactly the point I was making. It's just much more acceptable in the US for founders to step to one side and let somebody pick up the reins of the business. It's increasingly being accepted in the European startup ecosystem, and that's, I think, a really good thing, because I think it enables us to build bigger companies. There are very few individuals who can scale from 2 people to 2,000 or 20,000 or 200,000 people as a leader. And often it's one of those annoying things in VC where people always say, well, why don't you look at all the biggest companies, because they all have the founding CEOs as leaders. Yeah, and yes, in many respects that is the case. Facebook, Google, yes, Apple, yes, Microsoft, yes. But for the vast majority of companies, the founding CEOs don't often go on to be the final CEOs at the point at which the businesses get to true scale. Yeah. So it is a rare breed, but the ones that do it very successfully, and largely because they're inspirational. I would say Jobs was an inspirational leader, very focused. Yeah, he needed Tim Cook to do the execution as the COO on the ground, to build a supply chain, to make that business function. But for purity of thought, for purity of mission and vision and goals, and to inspire the workforce, I don't think there was many people better on the planet, frankly.
He also needed his British head of design as well, didn't he? Because he was pretty special. I think he's still there, isn't he? Jonathan Ive, is it?
Thank you. And Jonathan, he's just left, actually, but I think he remains in the team, yeah. So
I'm going to get in touch with him, see if he wants to set up a business that you can invest in. Okay, so let's move into the current situation then. I think this is a really good segue into it. First of all, you mentioned that when we started talking at the beginning that you've got some exciting ventures in your portfolio who are doing some really progressive stuff around COVID. Can you elaborate on that and on anything else in your portfolio which is quite relevant? Because I know most of your portfolio consists of health tech businesses and stuff around the periphery of that. Anything spring to mind?
So we haven't invested in anything specifically that's been COVID related from day one. I think what we found is within the portfolio, as any good entrepreneurs do, in a kind of crisis, people look for opportunity, and some of the healthcare companies that have pre-existed in our portfolio have found opportunity to capitalize on the current health crisis by turning their technology and turning their product towards addressing it. So if I think about companies like Big Health, mental health, digital therapeutic business, clearly a huge opportunity for that company in the face of lockdown, where you've got enterprises with thousands of employees who are facing very real challenges day to day because they're locked in their houses in difficult situations and their mental health is struggling. And there's a real opportunity for a business to both in the first instance, provide that service or offering at no cost or zero cost to certain categories, like the folks in the NHS who might need help from a mental health perspective. But also, commercially, huge amount of interest from corporates wanting to help their employees who are all working from home and address, those challenges which may not have been at the forefront of their mind, if you excuse the pun, when, in an office environment. So, that's a business that's seen huge interest simply because of the mindset shift that's happened and the requirement for people to think about this stuff given the circumstances we're in. And then there are other companies that are more not specifically able to address the crisis. So we've got a clinical trials recruitment business. As you're probably aware, there are hundreds now of clinical trials being set up around the world looking for COVID vaccine, about 30 or so actually live recruiting patients. And we have a company that's helping the pharma companies actually identify patient groups, and so proactively helping with the recruitment efforts for the development of the vaccine. Similarly, we have businesses like Medisafe, which have historically done drug adherence for patients, which are now much more involved in the kind of digitization of the patient journey. But they're able to capture lots of data around patients in the market, which can be quite useful and interesting as we try and understand the progression of the disease. So, folks where they haven't necessarily used the platform to capture the kind of data that is now required, turning their hand to, use that platform for the current health crisis. So, quite opportunistic, but clearly, a good thing in the face of some of the other companies in the broader portfolio who are far more challenged than those in the hospitality and travel sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about them then, because your role as a VC, as a venture capital investor, is also, I'm sure, to provide a little bit of mentorship and a little bit of an advisory, shoulder to cry on sort of thing, and advise these businesses what to do at times of hardship. This is definitely a time of hardship for lots of companies. What do you say to entrepreneurs who have just, whose pipeline has just dropped off 50, 60, 70%, and they've got all of their staff furloughed, and there's really troubling times ahead? What do you say to these guys, to these companies? I understand every situation is different, but I mean, generally,
I can tell you how we went about managing the portfolio immediately post the kind of lockdown, and that was really to speak to every single one of our portfolio companies, and our message to them was, as follows. And this is different from some of the messages I saw that come from other VCs, and definitely there's different views internationally, or were different views internationally when I spoke to my international VC colleagues. But our view to our commentary to our portfolio companies was, plan for the worst and hope for the best. What does that mean? That means ensure that we have, or you have as a company, 18 to 24 months of cash. And that means, a combination of understanding your financing options, whether that's, equity finance or debt finance. If we've got lines available, should we be drawing those lines? Credit lines. If we've got options for funding, what should that look like? How quickly can we do it? And then how should we manage our cost base? And when you put those two things together, can we eke out 18 to 24 months of runway? Because that's, in our view, what we're going to need in order to get to the other side of this before we're really in an environment that is, functioning back to some sense of normality, where the funding environment might be back to where it was, at least in part, if not in full. And it gives us more options. And so we went through every one of the 84 companies and made sure that they had a plan, a base case, worst case, a base case, and an upside case that we were comfortable that they were going to execute against. And then we figured out which ones needed money as quickly, sooner than others, which ones we could address further down the line, and which ones were going to be fine. And then we've gone through a series of processes to execute along those plans alongside the founders. So, we kind of went through a 2 or 3 week planning phase with every company. And now we're in that execution phase where we're ensuring that they're executing those plans. And then we're providing as much assistance we can with respect to, how do you think about your talent? What are the various schemes available from the government? How can we assist in terms of placing staff that you might have had to make redundant into other portfolio companies? Because hopefully we can find roles in some of the companies that are hiring, because not every company is furloughing all its staff. Some are still proactively hiring staff, depending on the industry they're in. And just a combination of all of those things, resources, advice, and financial support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really a tough time for lots of entrepreneurs at the moment, isn't it? I mean, it's just, I suppose it's a case of focusing on what's in your control. Really, that seems to be the pattern of what you're saying, Luke. I mean,
I think it's a case of
the outside.
Take control of your destiny. Yeah. Focus on survival in many cases, but don't take your eye off the opportunity, because in every crisis there's an opportunity. And we just talked about the opportunity for some of the healthcare companies, which might be quite obvious. for some of the other companies, there are all sorts of macro shifts. When we think about our cybersecurity businesses, we have a business that manages digital risk. That business was always, addressing the risk that sat outside of the company's perimeter. Now companies have no perimeter. Everybody's working from home. So there's a huge upside opportunity for that business. So whilst the companies they historically sold to may not be buying as much or maybe delaying purchases, it's important that they don't take their eye off the fact that on the other side of this, there's going to be a huge opportunity. And maybe it requires a different go-to-market strategy. Maybe it requires tweaks to the product. But you have to balance that planning for the worst and cost management with ensuring that you're geared up and ready to take advantage of the opportunity. And the only other thing I would say about that is we're trying to avoid what we call like opportunity mirages, where there's a short-term situation in the macro environment that means it appears to be an opportunity. Hey, let's not throw loads of money at it because that opportunity might disappear as fast as it emerged. So Absolutely. It's sifting the kind of opportunity from mirage from the real opportunity and then ensuring you execute correctly against each.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's quickly cover the macro situation then, and maybe let's get the macro crystal ball out and sort of what do you think is going to, how bad is this going to get, Luke? Are we in 2002, 2008, 2009 sort of levels recession? Do you think, are we talking 3-4 years of recession, do you reckon, or do you think we're going to bounce back relatively quickly?
I guess so. Two questions in there. One is depth of recession. I think it's going to be worse. I think it is worse. I think the job losses certainly in the US, and I know this word gets batted around a lot in the current climate. Unprecedented. Incredible a number of jobs been lost, and would have been even more so without the PPP or the furlough scheme in the UK. So I think the immediate impact, certainly March, April, May into June, is going to be enormous. The question then becomes, is it a V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, an L-shaped recovery? I think my view is probably it's unlikely to be a V. I'd like it to be a U, but I worry there may be aspects here that are L-shaped. And the recovery is much more drawn out. And I think it really depends on the industry. For the high street, it's always been it's been in kind of decline. Do I see the high street rebounding after this? I suspect not. I suspect it accelerates its decline and is replaced with something else, maybe something more experiential rather than retail. Do I see the airline industry bouncing back? Well, if you look at the statistics from 2000 from September 11, for example, where you had a global reduction in air travel of 10% over 8 weeks. A company like BA took 18 years to recover from that 10% reduction. We're currently looking at a 97% reduction. Airlines are not going to recover very quickly from that kind of impact. And when you think about how airlines have to operate going forward, it pretty much says that the majority of budget carriers are going to disappear, that prices are going to increase by 5x, and the whole dynamic that then drives for hotel chains and kind of budget holiday travel and the democratization of travel that's happened over the last few years. I think there's many questions. So I think there's going to be significant impacts, whereas in other areas in travel, whereas in other areas, healthcare, I think there's going to be a boom for certain aspects of the healthcare industry, and I think for enterprise software, the kind of drive to the digitization of the workplace is going to be rapidly accelerated. You're already seeing that in the kind of stocks on the NASDAQ. Zoom, for example, you and I talked about as we came on this call, kind of come from nowhere to being where it is. And I think any tools that facilitate remote working and help with that kind of digitization of the workforce are going to be, really driven very hard.
I think this is an interesting one. I've talked about this with a couple of guests recently and people in my general network around office space and being physically present in an office. Obviously we've been moving towards a remote working situation or split. Personally, like our company, for example, we started working from home on Mondays and Fridays. That's been sort of over the last couple of years. We've moved to that. We started off just the Monday, then we just did a Friday. Now we do both. I know a lot of companies work in the office all the time, and there's some companies who have to have everyone present in certain industries. But how do you think that's going to change? Because I think there's going to be a lot of companies who have got their remote working sort of situation going on in this current lockdown, and will think to themselves, well, why am I paying all this overhead when my team are just as productive working from home? Sod it, I'm not going to go back to the office. Let's cancel the lease. There's going to be a bit of that going on, isn't there? So how do you see this one playing out? Basically?
I think I'd be pretty nervous if I was a commercial landlord right now. I think there's probably kind of short, medium, long-term changes. I think it's really hard to forecast what the medium long looks like. I think certainly in the short term, and we're certainly seeing it in our portfolio, everybody's kind of reappraising, as you say, whether or not they need the space that they've got. And, at the most extreme, you've got folks like Twitter and some of the large tech companies saying, work from home permanently if you'd like, but we're still going to keep the office, whether it's the same scale or not remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. And then there's certainly portfolio companies that we have who have come to the end of their lease and have cancelled their lease for now and are saying we're not having an office. Now, whether they maintain that stance going forward and what impact that has on team and morale over the long term, I think remains to be seen. Do I think people are not going to want to meet each other and be face-to-face over, forever? I think that's not the case. Do I think, companies that had 3 floors of space in central London might consider taking that down to 1.5 floors and, having a mixture of much more remote workforce and then having an office space where people can get together to collaborate? So in the same sense, I said the high street might evolve to be experiential rather than transactional. Do I think the office moves to be more experiential and social rather than sitting at desks and transactional? I can see how those changes happen. But, there's been many times where people have forecast the death of central or city central real estate. Again, example of September 11, everyone said no one's going to want offices in high-rise blocks in the middle of cities. Clearly there was a massive boon in that post that situation. So, office space has proven over time to be pretty resilient to some of these things. But I do think now is a little bit different because back then there certainly wasn't the ability to work as remotely as you can today. Yeah. So I think it's kind of nice waking up, walking the dog and being at your desk at 8:30 without having to schlep in for 2 hours. And I think that's going to be hard to give up for a lot of folks. And in actual fact, it's the senior managers and the people who are making decisions who are benefiting probably most, certainly in the kind of work that, you and I and the kind of tech industry do. Clearly for other industries, it's going to be slightly different.
Okay, well, let's move on to something else then. I just want to stay on your portfolio, but with a different question. What are you excited about right now?
Yeah, I think I always tend to, if you think about our investments as kind of Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3, Horizon 1 investments for us are, stuff that is good for today, where that you can either build it and sell it immediately, where there's a demonstrable market need. Kind of Horizon 2 is stuff where the market need is in the short to medium term, but you may not necessarily have found product market fit, and there may be a bit more exploratory. Horizon 3 is the kind of really edge case. Here's where the future is going to be, and we made some Horizon 3 investments a while back, which are now kind of coming towards 2, and maybe their time is going to be where they reach Horizon 1 in the next 1 or 2 years, and I'll talk about 1 or 2 of those that I think are quite interesting, where their time's about arrived. And then we've recently made some interesting Horizon 3 investments, which are super speculative bits of technology, which, might change the future. But so on the kind of stuff that we did a while back, we spent a lot of time a few years ago thinking about the evolution of, computer interfaces and how that's going to play out. It's a much more common narrative today that says in the next few years, we're not going to have smartphones. We're all going to wear augmented reality glasses. And, the kind of digital world's going to be overlaid on the physical world. To get from where we were 5 years ago or 6 years ago to that has been an interesting journey. And, that whole host of technologies had to come together to create a situation whereby one of the large tech companies can release a set of kind of augmented reality glasses that, work with maybe a phone rather than supplement in the first case. But I think you're starting to see that. So 2021, 22, we're going to see the first bits of consumer grade augmented reality technology. We invested in a company 4 or 5 years ago that's been working on the essentially the optical systems for those glasses for the last 4 or 5 years. We're really, really, really excited about what's going to happen to that business as the world starts to transition to kind of fully wearable technology, because we feel that company's got the only large-scale manufacturable solution to essentially optical waveguides, which are going to be the key component in those kind of glasses. So, as a company called Wave Optics, it's been, like a slow burn for us, but it's a stealth company in many ways, but we think the next couple of years, its time is really going to come.
So, sorry, what do you mean by wave guides or wave guides? What's that?
Wave guides, yeah. So when you think about a pair of augmented reality glasses, let's say, you have to find a way of getting the image from whatever's creating the image into your eyes, if you like. And if you think about what glasses are like, essentially they're a transparent lens. So how do you get something projected into your eyes through something that's transparent? And the way you do it is with a wave guide. Essentially, it's a kind of structure in the lens that bends the light through 90 degrees so that as you're looking in the lens, you can start to see the image in front of you, even though there's no componentry behind that image.
Yeah.
So, that's a key component. It's essentially the display for an augmented reality pair of glasses. And the company we invested in 4 or 5 years ago has been developing the display technology to enable other large companies who might want to release those kind of glasses to be able to release those glasses. So if you think about what Microsoft did with HoloLens, it's essentially the next generation of that. But HoloLens was very difficult to manufacture at large scale. This is a kind of the manufacturability has been solved, which is one of the key things you need to worry about when you're investing in kind of consumer grade technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure another key challenge for a technology like that, though, correct me if I'm wrong, would be how would you, is the control of it? I've heard about these glasses, you control them with your eyelashes or something, where surely that's quite limiting. It's a yes or no, it's like binary code, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure how they're going to crack that one. I'm sure that there's lots of things going on.
So you kind of have multiple stages. In stage one, where the glasses are a companion device, they're essentially a display that replaces the display on your phone. So you control your phone and you will change what's going on in the display. Stage two, where those glasses actually replace the phone itself, then you have no device to use as a control. And on that basis, then it becomes a gesture-based driven system. So the glasses will have a camera or sensor, and then hand gestures you can use to. And we've even seen technologies where you have essentially a device that can measure the electrical signals in the jaw as it's attached to, which is in the arm of the glasses, and those electrical signals you can actually, using machine learning, determine what somebody would have said. So you can almost do speech recognition without somebody speaking, simply by picking up the electrical signals in their jaw as they're thinking about what it is they would say. So you have there a device where you can do a Google search without speaking and have that search, for example, appear in your glasses as you're wearing them. So quite cool.
Did you listen to I don't know if you listen to podcasts very often, but there was Elon Musk was on the Joe Rogan one, and he was talking about his company Neuralink. Yeah. And he was talking about what you're explaining there.
Neuralink's much more invasive and theoretically kind of quite powerful. I mean, that is very much a Horizon 3 technology. It'll be a long time, I think, before we see people implanting wires in their brain, even if they have got smart robots that do it. But fascinating. I think some of his predictions of the end of language, which is kind of probably where you were coming at, he's saying it'll be the end of language. That's definitely some crystal ball gazing long term. And then the other thing,
crystal ball guy, isn't he? The Elon Musk.
That's to be applauded. I think we need more Howard Hughes, Elon Musk types on the planet.
I completely agree. I think he's great. Okay. Well, look, I mean, we're coming up towards the allocated time that we put aside now. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about yourself, really, Luke. I mean, we talked at the beginning, you just had a baby. Massive congratulations. Obviously, you're at home in your, is it your mother-in-law's house at the moment? Yeah. So what are you doing to sort of stay productive, keep on top of your routine, keep on top of your structure? What are you doing to keep yourself sane during this crazy time?
Yeah, well, two things. Productivity, I don't think is really a problem. If anything, I'm more productive just because, I'm not having to travel all over the world to board meetings, and we're not moving between meeting different entrepreneurs, which I really enjoy. But being able to meet people remotely is, frankly, much more time efficient. Part of the challenge is actually finding the gaps between those meetings because, otherwise I sit on Zoom calls for 10 hours a day and it's about exhaustion. So I think once you find the cadence of the right number of calls at the right level, then it's just, for me, how do you get downtime? I like to go out running. We're fortunate enough here to be out in the edge of the countryside, and so I put my kind of running shoes on and go and pound the lanes in the forest and in the valleys. But what I have done, and I shall show you it while I'm here, is I also hark back to the 1980s. So I've bought myself. I've been building this. This is a 1988 re-release of a Tamiya remote-controlled car. And so I thought I'll try and build this in the odd moment I thought I might have in my downtime. Obviously, I have no downtime, but it's taken me quite a long time. But I thought, I'll build it for my son. Clearly, building a remote control car, tinkering with electronics. I find that quite therapeutic. Not for everybody.
Well, just a little word of advice. That downtime you talk about. Yeah, as the kid grows older, the downtime shrinks, and then if you got two, the downtime is historical. You don't have downtime.
I'm already finding that now, so God knows what that's like.
So, what person, book, or story have you been inspired by recently?
Recently,
but it doesn't have to be recently. Sorry, in general.
Yeah, in general, I tell you what, I think I read, which I found quite inspirational. It's a book. It's called Project Azorian. It's about the raising of K-129, which is a Russian nuclear submarine. It's really the story of how, I think it was in the early 70s, the CIA discovered that there was a downed Russian submarine on the seafloor. And they put together this incredibly ambitious plan under the guise of one of the entrepreneurs at the time, Howard Hughes, that they were going to pick this submarine off the floor from 3 miles down, 350 tons, and pull it into the bottom of a ship, a hollow ship. And they had to devise this ship from scratch using technology from the 70s to lift up this submarine from the seafloor 3 miles down. An incredible feat of engineering. I think they spent the equivalent of $4 or $5 billion building this ship. And so it's the story of how the team were pulled together, a crack team, to develop, design, and execute on this kind of audacious plan. So this real interesting mix of, incredible ambition, amazing technology, and then amazing execution to kind of pull this scheme off, all under the guise of, the kind of Elon Musk of the day, who put his name to it to try and hide what was really going on. So, really fascinating story for me. And, just when I read about the technology they put into that ship, apparently it was still knocking around in 1991. And it was the people that looked at it were still, amazed at just how advanced it happened to be even 30 years beforehand. So, really interesting story, really inspirational, and really, really cool.
What was that called again, sorry?
It's called Project Azorian. So it's some of the books, I think, called The Raising of K-129, which was the name of the submarine that they pulled off the seafloor.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. I'll definitely check that out. So yeah, I mean, I think just wanted to end on this one really, Luke. I think you've obviously had a really good career. You've had a great career. You've got the longest LinkedIn profile I've ever seen, by the way. It's just so many invested, which is incredible that you've had exposure to all these companies. So you give a bit of advice to small businesses earlier on in terms of what you were saying to your portfolio. But for a young entrepreneur out there who's maybe started a business in the last 6 months and is experiencing a tough marketplace and a potential recession for the next couple of years, what advice would you give to those people who are trying to run a business and get it off the ground, attract venture capital, and scale, and want to scale? Maybe a software company or something like that. But what advice would you give to them to sort of go from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel would call it?
Yeah, look, I think it really depends on what industry they're in. At the moment, I think there's an element of, as I said, patience. Bide your time if you're being deeply affected, but don't ignore the opportunities that this affords. And principally, going back to what I said at the beginning, is spend this time to ensure that you've got the right people in the team. And if you are unfortunately going to have to reduce the scale of the team, sometimes that can be an opportunity to refresh with team members that are A players, where early on you may have made hiring mistakes or errors for good reason, but don't be afraid to revert on those errors and make changes where necessary, because fundamentally success is going to be driven by the people that you hire, and having a team of A players on the other side of this is going to be the thing that positions you best to scale. Having A players that can take whatever assets you have, whether that's venture capital, whether it's friends and family, or whether it's purely product and you're going to bootstrap it, is going to require the best people in the right seats at the right time.
Brilliant advice. Cheers for that, Luke, and very much appreciate you coming on the show. And good luck with the portfolio going forward, and good luck with the little one.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Really appreciate it. Cheers.